habit of oppression, longing for sweet freedom's reign. It's no easy, it's no easy walk. It's no easy, it's no easy walk. It's no easy walk. It's no easy walk to freedom. It's no easy walk. It's no easy. It's no easy walk. It's no easy. It's no easy walk. It's no easy walk. It's no easy walk to freedom. It's no easy walk.
And a river went out of Eden to water the garden. And thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. And the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. It's 100 years since Europe divided up Africa without consulting the people. While the British, French, Spanish, and Portuguese had taken their colonies, Italy was still looking for more. Advancing from Eritrea, they met an African people with ancient traditions who were determined to fight for their freedom. Ethiopia's stand inspired a continent.
ኢትዮጵያኖች ሁላችሁም ሳታውቁት አትቀሩም በተፈጥሯችን
In Ethiopia, by nature, we are not a nation of losers. We don't like to be beaten. You may have heard this, or you could have read it in history books, or worked it out for yourselves. I am sure this will never disappear from Ethiopian blood. I just thank God that Ethiopia managed to survive some terrible days without ever being totally enslaved by our enemies.
በጣም እንደው ደስ እያለኝ እኔ የሚሰማኝ ይሄ ነው።
Aksum is one of the most ancient capitals in Africa. Several of the great obelisks are still standing, and a few kilometers away stand the ruins of the Queen of Sheba's palace. Today's festivals date back to the 4th century AD, when Christianity first became the state religion. These rituals of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church have changed little since that time.
No part of Africa was free from outside influence, but the influence in Ethiopia was really considerably much less than the influence in the rest of Africa. Therefore, Ethiopian economy, Ethiopian society could evolve in the 20th century in its own historical momentum, more or less.
Throughout African history, the resistance of Ethiopia against the colonial expansion of Europe, as shown in a number of battlegrounds like Adwa and so on, very clearly shows that Ethiopia was, kept, the fire of freedom going on.
Rulers of Ethiopia were known as King of Kings. Each one left a replica of his crown here in Aksum and looked to the church for spiritual support in times of trouble. The cathedral and monastery are the center of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, as well as the historical center of the whole culture. A few miles east of Aksum is the historic battleground of Adwa. In 1896, Emperor Menelik brought his army up here to Tigray to defend the country against invaders. They found themselves facing an Italian army of 17,000 men.
Emperor Menelik, for the first time in the history of Ethiopia, succeeded in mobilizing the whole of Ethiopia to defend the country. And all his minor and major chiefs enlisted in his army and moved up north to meet the Italian invasion.
Over 40% of the Italian army was killed or seriously wounded. They fled the field of battle. They had had some superiority of weapons, inasmuch as that they had 56 cannon against the Ethiopians' 40. But the Ethiopians had superiority in actual rifles and achieved this massive victory, as a result of which they captured all the Italian artillery and most of the rifles which were left behind on the scene of battle. It was a resounding victory.
The victory of Emperor Menelik and his Empress Taitu became so famous that painters all over Ethiopia were soon depicting the battle scenes in traditional style. Europe's popular press had been poking fun at Italy's African adventures for some time. They now showed little sympathy for Italian Prime Minister Crespi. Defeated at Adwa, his government resigned 2 days later. And the Times Rome correspondent, alarmed by the events in Africa, reported,
"The recent Italian defeat must diminish European prestige throughout Africa, wherever civilization is brought into contact with barbarism."
Italy, which had claimed a protectorate over Ethiopia, was obliged to sign the peace treaty of Addis Ababa, in which Italy recognized the full independence of Ethiopia. The great powers, particularly the British and French, immediately sent envoys to Ethiopia, and Menelik's position was greatly strengthened. He was now recognized both in Europe and in Africa as a power.
Emperor Menelik, I consider a genius. He was an exceptional person, not highly educated in the Ethiopian way, but he knew no foreign language, but he had several advantages to his status. First of all, he belonged to the Solomonian dynasty, tracing from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Number two, he had had experience as a prisoner at Emperor Theodore's capital. Number three, he was highly diplomatic and very patient. He realized that conditions had changed, that he required contact and help from the outside world.
Menelik founded the first schools, the first hospitals. He was the first ruler to send students abroad for study. He established the first bank, the railway to Djibouti, the roads, the telegraph system, and the telephone, so that his words could be heard throughout the whole country.
In 1896, at the Battle of Adwa, he had captured 1,800 Italian prisoners who were brought to Addis and were given very reasonable and kind treatment. So they became so friendly, and they helped him in certain ways. They helped him put a telegraph and telephone line from Addis to Harar using trees and poles.
Even today, much of Menelik's telephone system is still in use. 100 years ago, a telephone call could take the place of a week's journey by mule.
so that in every way it was Menelik that brought Ethiopia from the Middle Ages really into the 19th century, and this he did with great rapidity.
One of his most spectacular achievements was to have the railway built from the Red Sea coast 9,000 feet up to his new capital, Addis Ababa. But though a lot of Menelik's innovations are still very much evident today, at the time Ethiopia was ridiculed in Europe as being outside so-called civilization.
I think that one has to recognize that Britain in particular was very Eurocentric in those days. Anything which seemed different tended to be ridiculed, especially if it was something in Africa, something concerning black people.
Into the courtyard of the palace of the Emperor at Addis Ababa ride 4 diplomats to pay a courtesy call on His Imperial Majesty. And now for a little formality, without which no palace is complete. You pass the time of day with the second assistant chamberlain and the keeper of the royal stables, and then go for a stroll while they get lunch ready. The diplomats, their usual lunchtime long past, are ready for anything, and that's just as well. No government house rules here. 1 dish of fried chicken for the form. No newfangled European ideas like plates and serviettes. It's every man for himself. You grab the tastiest bit before the other fellow can get to it, and feel grateful to the gentleman whose job it is to wave away the flies.
Menelik died in 1913, and there was then a prolonged power struggle before a young prince was accepted as the new ruler. He was later to be known as Haile Selassie.
In 1930, it was decided to have the coronation on November 2nd. On November 2nd, before that, all the different powers in the world had been approached to send their delegates. Great Britain sent the Duke of Gloucester. French government sent Le Marshal Planchet d'Espèrey. The Italians sent the Duca di Udine. The Americans sent the banker, Mr. Jacobi, and so on and so forth. We organized a big trainload of ambassadors from Djibouti to Addis. This was a 3-day trip. So on Sunday, November 2nd, we had this big coronation at St. George.
Military splendor equal to that of any Western country, the various delegations are welcomed. Chieftains and their picturesque retainers arrive into the capital. At last at their destination, outside the Emperor's palace.
The Western press found the whole event difficult to comprehend. Their reports were a mixture of amusement, horror, and genuine astonishment.
For sheer magnificence of color, this spectacle would be difficult to surpass. The chiefs came in full dress and were all armed to the teeth. And altogether, the ceremony had the barbaric splendor that only a mysterious country like Abyssinia can produce.
It was a remarkable event. All great chiefs from the interior had come. You had a mixture of foreign. You had Kaiser Wilhelm's carriage with 8 horses. Then you had these chiefs from the interior on their mules and lances. It was a very colorful affair.
The pageantry of the coronation celebrations was reminiscent of a huge cinema spectacle. And the movie-tow newsreel man with his camera bears out this suggestion. After the parade, a banquet for 30,000 was provided, at which every imaginable delicacy was served. The celebrations lasted a whole week.
While exotic pageantry was the only aspect of the country that interested most visitors, the new regime began to strengthen the policies of modernization started by Menelik. Scientific education was introduced to the schools in the capital and provincial centers.
It was proud of its old traditions. For that reason, there was a conservative streak in the country. There was a resistance to innovation. And yet, during this time, during the 20s and 30s, progress had continued. The first aeroplanes arrived in 1929. The first radio station was established in 1933. And one could see that Ethiopia was becoming stronger, it was becoming more united, it was becoming more modernized. And this, of course, had international implications, and it was a danger to Ethiopia, because Italy, which had not forgotten the Battle of Adwa and was thinking of a possible war of revenge, because the Italians were poised on either side of Ethiopia, in Eritrea in the north and in Somalia in the south. They had not given up the idea of occupying and taking Ethiopia. They realized that the modernization of the 1920s and 30s was advancing so well that Ethiopia soon would not be a conquerable state.
In 1922, Mussolini had come to power in Italy. By the early 30s, he had dispatched thousands of additional troops to his African colonies.
In Abyssinia, the wet season is nearly over. Rain clouds disperse, but the war clouds gather. The emperor's subjects are rallying to the cause. The natives now regard war as inevitable. In their thousands, they have flocked to the capital, and every day street corner crowds listen to fervent recruiting speeches. The response is all the authorities can cope with. Names taken, the new soldiers are sent to the camp. Day by day, the constant stream of potential warriors pours into Addis. Knowing that Mussolini has said no to all peace proposals, the Abyssinians are pledged to defend their soil.
Traditional dances and feasts took on new meanings in 1935 as everyone began to realize they would soon have to defend the country.
Italy now has over 200,000 men in Eritrea. More arrive daily. As their commander inspects them, they have caught in the ancient Roman salute of the legions of Caesar, the raised dagger. The general rides to the saluting base for the march past. While Italy masses her troops in Eritrea, Abyssinia is drilling her army. European training methods are the vogue. Sergeant majors sound the same in any language.
እንደ ኢትዮጵያ ቁጥር አዲሱ 1928 ዓመተ ምህረት በሚጀመርበት ጊዜ ይህ አዲሱ ዓመት ባለፈው ዓመት ቀኖች ውስጥ የሆኑትን ታላላቅ ነገሮች
So spoke Haile Selassie over the radio, and the interpretation.
On the threshold of this year of grace 1928, according to our Ethiopian calendar, and in the hope that our new year, which is just commencing, will bring to our people and to the world the peace which they ardently desire and which is indispensable to them, it is opportune to glance at the events which have filled our days during the past year. We do not want war, but we will not undergo it passively. Ethiopia has confidence in God.
I am a soldier and the son of a soldier. I know very well what my name means both in England and in Italy. Let me make a very clear statement. Italy cannot understand why the League of Nations that's taken no steps in the Chinese-Japanese question, that has not interfered in the Chaco troubles, is today so strong against this Italian campaign in Abyssinia. Italy needs the ground for expansion. She does not look to any adventurer, and certainly she does not want any war with the rest of the world. And I tell you that there is no wish in our country to see such a terrible thing come over again in Europe.
ከሌላው አገር ልዩነት ልዩ የሚያደርገን በእውነቱ ይሄ የአርበኝነት ስራ
What makes us different is our patriotism. But it came out most strongly when we had to struggle and fight in terms for our freedom. There was absolutely no one to come to our help. And it was at that time we vowed to each other that we'd fight to the end. If it was humanly possible, the last one of us would rather kill himself than be taken prisoner.
Without warning, on October 3rd, 1935, the Italians bombed Adwa and their infantry crossed the border.
Eritrean troops led the advance, and these are the first pictures to reach England, showing the invading forces entering the city.
They reached Aksum in a few weeks, their troops supported by aerial bombardment. But to Mussolini, the advance was not fast enough. He ordered the army to press on immediately towards Addis Ababa.
What always surprised me about our fighters was their courage and defiance, even when the Italians were using all sorts of sophisticated and modern weapons. They attacked us with poison gas and with bombs dropped from aeroplanes, but nobody's moral weakened. We all stood firm. They sprayed us with bullets. I saw some patriots who didn't know about the tanks. They'd never seen tanks before. They used to chase after them and try to attack the tanks with rocks and swords in their hands. Can you imagine? With rocks? I have seen it many times and I will never forget it.
ጎራዴ እየመዘዙ ጎራዴያቸውን እያነቃነቁ እየሄዱ ይመታሉም ይሞታሉም።
ከጠላት መወረሩ በፊት የተዘጋጀው ወታደር የሰለጠንኩ ወታደር ነበርኩ። ስልጣኔም
Before the invasion, we were ready. I was trained as an officer in the regular army. I had heard about the atrocities committed by the colonizers in neighboring countries, Kenya and Somalia. So we know what it would be like, and we were quite prepared for the invasion with anger and determination boiling up inside.
At that time, we didn't have that much in the way of weapons. Our guns were really old and took only one bullet at a time. Then they would have to throw out the cartridge and put in another one. That was completely useless. What was useful were the weapons we captured from the enemy. That's really how we were able to get stronger.
Italy has won the biggest victory of the Abyssinian War. These pictures, just released by Marshal Badoglio's stringent censorship, show the invading forces moving up. 75,000 infantry, supported by tanks, made an encircling movement against Aradam. From that fortified mountain scroll, the Abyssinians threatened to recapture Makale. Planes flew at 15,000 feet over the tracklet. Spotting Rat Mulugeta's battalion, the planes radioed to headquarters. The advance began. Italy has claimed 5,000 fields. Whatever the truth, the threat to Makale was averted, and the Amber Aradam mountain captured by the Italians.
The army that I was in defended and fought for more than a year and a half in the Kansas South. But eventually, enemy forces came in through the eastern part of the country, and they managed to reach Addis Ababa. From Addis, they took off in planes and bombarded our base, which was at Yirgalem in Sidama province.
The Italians advanced on both fronts through March and April, using poison gas sprayed from aeroplanes. The Ethiopian armies were forced to retreat.
Ras Seyum's army was destroyed in Tigray. Prisoners were herded into camps. Irreplaceable weapons were lost. Without modern arms, the Ethiopians' courage was tragically futile.
Actually, we were defending pretty strongly, but they sent up reinforcements which caught us at the back while we were fighting at the front. So we were finished. Our army was defeated. After that, most of our generals were captured and shot dead. That include my father, Fitorari Garamu, and other generals such as Tasamma Abdi, Fitorari Workner. Then I was taken prisoner myself and kept locked up in the town.
Many of the prisoners had lost brothers on the battlefield, killed as they tried to tear the guns from the enemy's hands. Now they have lost their guns and their honor in the humiliation of capture.
Metteteli tutti in riga. Su, 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 avanti, avanti. Di qua, tutti in fila.
While I was a prisoner, it was a terrible situation. There was looting. All our property was stolen and burned. I was kept there as a prisoner for 2 years. Then afterwards, I began to hear about the World War. About that time, I somehow managed to escape, and I immediately wanted to start again and fight with the resistance of the patriots.
The League of Nations condemned Italy's aggression, but the sanctions imposed were half-hearted and did not include petrol or aircraft fuel for Mussolini's tanks and planes. Even the emperor began to wonder if any country would take up their cause against the European power.
Beaten in the last battle, abandoned by the League of Nations, the emperor had retreated through deserted towns and villages towards Addis Ababa. Though the Italians were closing in behind him, he stopped for 2 days to fast and pray on his knees in the monolithic church of Lalibela. Haile Selassie planned to move to the hills and fight a guerrilla campaign, but his chiefs and advisors knew their broken armies could not fight on. They persuaded the emperor to leave Ethiopia.
Should the emperor have left? Many Ethiopian patriots now say they don't believe he ever intended to stay and fight.
There he got to Addis Ababa. He called all nobles, higher officials, and others to a meeting in his palace. They all agreed in one point, and that was that they should transfer the whole court and the government to Gore, and then they would start a guerrilla campaign. But after they had all agreed about that, then he went and suddenly changed his mind. He looted all the gold from the Ethiopian treasury and left the palace by a secret gate. He took the train from a place called Akaki together with his family and nobles.
Other Ethiopians now feel that the emperor's escape was preferable to the ultimate disgrace of his capture. And after all, the Italians were closing in fast.
On May the 2nd, the imperial family left by train for Djibouti, en route for Palestine, and exile in London. The emperor was leaving a poisoned landscape, turning yellow under an invisible rain of mustard gas sprayed from aircraft. Spraying the mountainsides flanking his columns had eased Badoglio's advance. Where the gas touched flesh, Blisters broke out. Barefoot warriors were very vulnerable as they marched over the poisoned land. The falling gas burned their shoulders and left many blind. The fumes burned lungs. People died from drinking poisoned water. The horrified Red Cross volunteers were not equipped to treat gas burns. Mustard gas was outlawed by international agreement after World War I. Mussolini authorized its widespread use to bring about the quick victory which would justify his huge investment in the war.
The first and natural effect was shock and bewilderment. The Ethiopians have been used to fighting for their independence for decades, but this was a different kind of invasion with the most modern weapons and very massive use of them. So initially the shock was the first important effect. Gradually, however, Ethiopians began to react, to pull their resources, to pull whatever they have within them, and to fight in every possible way.
But while the patriots began to organize themselves, the newsreels gave no hint of Ethiopian resistance.
Abyssinia is Italian. That was the Duce's pronouncement to the world when Mauro Badoglio climaxed his triumphant campaign. Advancing up the last pitched battle, the invaders came within a short march of Addis Ababa. Before they entered its gates, the Abyssinian capital was almost literally reduced to ashes. Street after street of ruins symbolized the complete overthrow of the Abyssinian Empire. Alone of newsreel photographers, Paramount News cameraman, John Dorrid, remained at his post. All others took the Emperor's advice and left the city before the looting began. Our pictures of the sacking of Addis Ababa therefore have unique historical interest. Thus the invaders have belied all the prophets and supposed experts, ended the war, and compelled the virtual surrender of Abyssinia into their hands. We would once more stress the fact that it is not the function of British Paramount News to comment on this war. All along, we have impartially presented a graphic record of the campaign, leaving it to you, if you saw fit, to sympathize.
This was a very sad piece of news to me. People had thought he would stay and lead them and fight with them. They never believed he would abandon them. It was a very serious matter. In the whole history of Ethiopia, he was the first and last king to do such a shameful thing. It was something we all condemned. History will judge him.
የሚወገዝ ድርጊት ነው ያደረጉት። ታሪክ ፈረዳቸዋል።
Meanwhile, the Negus is in Geneva, where in the new League of Nations palace, seen in the background, he comes to present his plea to the nation.
His Majesty will make the Paris arrest. I call upon the first delegate to Ethiopia.
Monsieur le Président.
So in an unprecedented scene, Haile Selassie stands in dignified silence, waiting for the uproar created by Italian journalists to cease.
When the whistling did subside, the emperor pointed out that in spite of the League's condemnation, Italy's invasion had resulted in the occupation of his country. What action would the League now take? As he declared, God and history will remember your judgment.
And amid a very moved gathering, the emperor descends from the rostrum to resume his seat among the delegates.
Because this Italian invasion of Ethiopia was intertwined with, at the time, European politics, European struggles. This was, as you know, the eve of World War II. It became difficult for many countries like Britain, for instance, or like France, to mention just a couple, to have the moral fortitude to decide as a matter of principle against aggression and for the victim. And so they failed to take that necessary step, and as a result, the League itself also floundered.
Great as is the League, the ends that it exists to serve are greater than itself, and the greatest of these ends is peace. Thus Britain's spokesman, Lord Halifax, here seen arriving for the momentous council meeting. Monsieur Bonnet, French Foreign Minister, supports the British proposal that members should decide for themselves whether to recognize Italy's conquest of Abyssinia, while Mr. Taizaz and Mr. Medan are present as Ethiopia's delegates.
Meanwhile, far away in Africa, the tramp of soldiers' feet again, oft-times bare. The battle was now nearly over, but though the end was near, morale was still high.
In the council chamber, the session, which is presided over by Dr. Munters of Latvia, arrives at a speedy conclusion, and Lord Halifax's proposal is adopted. This, in practice, means the recognition that Abyssinia is Italian, a bitter result for Haile Selassie, Emperor without a throne, too ill, as he said, to address his own speech to the council. He returns to London a dejected but still dignified figure and passes through the city on the way back to his retreat in the west of England.
So, in spite of massive public support in Britain for the Ethiopian cause, the Western governments had recognized Mussolini's annexation of Ethiopia. The Italians celebrated in the streets of Addis.
Immediately after the occupation of Addis Ababa, a colonial conference was held in Trieste, which proclaimed that there should be rigid division between the races.
Whites and blacks couldn't eat or drink together. Even the housing was all segregated.
Minister Teruzzi is at this very moment carrying out the express wishes of our leader as he puts the finishing touches to his plans for the new capital of the Italian Empire of Ethiopia. The purifying flames raise to the ground these filthy hovels, dens of disease and degradation. The flames do their duty, purging thoroughly and drastically, definitively. Hundreds of our brave firemen have been mobilized for the urgent program of urban resanitization.
Altogether, 20,000 people were forcibly ejected and their houses burned. They were moved to a specially designed native quarter.
Here, in the northwest quarter, a huge new estate has already been completed. The little brick houses are now ready to receive the inhabitants who have been evacuated from the old slums. This is the first evidence of how the future city will look. The natives are to be separated into different groups according to race and religion.
One has to appreciate the fact that although the Italians symbolically occupied Addis Ababa, the capital, they by no means occupied the country. This was not a colonial situation as such. It was an occupation, a partial occupation, but they never had peace for the moment, even in Addis. Just a few meters from here, we have the Katit 12 monument, which commemorates the massacre that was inflicted upon the people of Addis Ababa because a couple of Ethiopians threw bombs at the then Italian viceroy here, Graziani.
It was at one of these public appearances that the bombs were thrown. Graziani's response was brutal.
They burned down houses and went around killing people for 3 whole days. Of course, there was complete segregation everywhere.
Graziani became known as the Butcher of Addis Ababa. But in spite of his brutality, he failed to crush the patriotic resistance, even inside the capital.
And this is the headquarters of the man who at his emperor's command held up the flag of Ethiopian liberty for 5 years. Ras Ababa Aragai, one of the bravest men in the modern world. Ababa Aragai has spent the past 5 years never more than 100 miles from Addis Ababa. With a price on his head, he's been wounded in battle half a dozen times. He's foiled more than one Italian expedition of 15,000 men.
When they saw us spread out in quite an open area, they would come out to attack us. Then, of course, we would all come out of hiding, fight them, and capture their weapons. That was our strategy.
I've got some photographs. This is with my son, who was just 5 years old. We were surrounded by about 40,000 enemy troops at the time. It was only after the fascists sided with Germany that the British decided to destroy the Italians in the Horn of Africa. So then they came to help with a few soldiers. They said that Ethiopian patriots were quite sufficient to drive the Italians out of Ethiopia. They thought all that was needed was a few extra weapons and a few of their soldiers.
The film glossed over the fact that the Patriots had been waiting for more than 4 years to get any outside assistance at all.
And now the promised arms are coming. British rifles with British bayonets, all sorts, Martinis, Lee Metfords, Lee Enfields, and American rifles, Springfields. It was a chance shipment from America that gave the first armed impetus to the revolt. Now into the lorries, troops, rifles, bayonets, provisions and all. And we'll show the Italians what we mean by Ethiopian independence.
The resistance fighters were able to rally the whole population behind them and help the British forces which were coming with Haile Selassie to get the Italians out of that area. And even the different separate governments they had set up were able to come together and rally under one banner of just getting rid of the Italians. Ethiopia as a state was much stronger after the war than before the war, and it was as a result of the spirit of resistance to alien occupation as well as the spirit of unity.
Right after the war, there were some frictions with the British occupied enemy territory administration, as they used to call it then, and which resulted in eventually the Americans elbowing into the picture and developing our communication system. And one of the systems which they developed was the airlines. And now we are talking of the 1940s, and the Ethiopian Airlines is now in its 40th year.
Air travel to and from the capital is by Ethiopian Airlines, a company managed and technically operated by Trans World Airlines, on capital supplied by Ethiopia's government. Recently, however, under the authority of UNO, a system has been adopted of training their own young men as first officers and radio operators. After the liberation, it was decided that air travel to places outside Ethiopia was by far the most convenient as well as the quickest means of communication. Within the empire, a score of towns now have their regular air services, and one of the proudest privileges of youth is to be enrolled for training at the Civil Aero School.
Today, all the airline's pilots are Ethiopian, trained on sophisticated flight simulators just a few yards from the main buildings at the airport. Not only the pilots, but maintenance engineers and traffic controllers are all Ethiopian too.
Takeoff checklist complete. Before takeoff checklist complete. Yeah.
Hotel Yankee, Roger, clear to taxi, holding position runway 07, wind 12008, QNH 1027 millibars.
The idea of independence is very strong here at Ethiopian Airlines. They have always seen their role as promoting better communications between the countries of Africa by pioneering many trans-African routes.
The invasion of Ethiopia was a demonstration to all the world that attacks from the air could only properly be met by defense in the air. Ethiopia herself learned this lesson at the bitter cost of defeat. After the liberation, therefore, one of the most urgent necessities was seen to be the formation of a national air force.
Today, many of the trainees are military pilots and others who come from independent states and liberation movements throughout Africa. As all the instruction is in English, most of them start with an intensive course here in the language laboratory.
Heat from the sun is transmitted through space.
In the late 50s and early 60s, Ethiopia was supporting liberation movements in Africa, very subtly, very low-keyed, but nevertheless important. And shortly thereafter also scholarships were offered for African students. Ethiopia itself is a developing country with limited resources, but it became active in this regard, in this area also. Scholarship students came from East Africa, from Kenya, from Tanzania, from West Africa, Ghana, everywhere else, in many, many countries.
With students from all over Africa, Addis Ababa rapidly became a center for radical politics. The students responded to leaders such as Nkrumah, who saw the future as a pan-African struggle for freedom. At the All-African People's Conference in Accra, Ghana, Ethiopia's history of resisting colonialism was an inspiration for many delegates. Several came from countries still under colonial rule. Tom Mboya represented Kenya's struggle for freedom.
What's your view of Dr. Nkrumah's vision of a union of the whole of Black Africa?
I am quite sure that every African leader would like to see a greater and closer relationship between the various African territories and the various African states.
In 1963, Ethiopia played a major role in setting up the OAU. Undeterred by his experiences with the League of Nations in the 1930s, the emperor had long been arguing at the UN for the complete decolonization of Africa. Now, the country was in a unique and historic position.
Ethiopia, not being a part of English-speaking or French-speaking or Portuguese-speaking or, for that matter, even Italian-speaking, that was an asset, that it was not within one block or another, or one category or another. It was, it symbolized really the continuity of African history without being aligned to one or another. This has been the malaise of Africa for some time. The other thing I think is, at the time, the emperor the ex-emperor was an old man. Many of the leaders knew him while they were very young. Maybe they were in jail or they were in exile. And so the sense of reverence, age is important in Africa. And it was not very difficult for most African leaders to follow.
በቅርቡ በሮዴዚያ የተፈጠረውን ሁኔታ ምክንያት በማድረግ የአፍሪካ አንድነት ድርጅት
By 1963, at least almost 40% at least of the African countries were not yet independent. And so the struggle for independence was still going on. And so Ethiopia could, as an old independent country, could become a host, and it was willing to make its resources available for this purpose.
The Great Window at Africa Hall represents the struggle for African freedom throughout history. To Ethiopians, it has always symbolized their own contribution to that struggle.
There was a feeling in Ethiopia that we resisted the scramble for Africa at the Battle of Adwa. Our patriots resisted the Italians during the 5 years of Italian fascist occupation. Now, so to speak, by training freedom fighters in other countries, we are handing on the torch of freedom of the independent struggle to our compatriots, our brothers in other parts of the continent.
If Africa unites, it will be because each part, each nation, each tribe gives up a part of its heritage for the good of the whole. That is what union means. That is what Pan-Africa means. Give up individual rights for the needs of Mother Africa.